So let me just welcome you back, and perhaps myself as well, to this session. It's been a long summer, hasn't it? And I know that you are anxious for this week to pass, because at least you'll then have a whole week for those of you who are teaching before you go back to work. But I want to say that it has been a long and difficult session, but we're grateful that we have managed to come almost to the end of it. This final week, it's going to be mostly looking at lessons, evaluating lessons against what we have actually done before. And so I wanted to spend the time today to look at lesson analysis, and firstly to do some quick recapping of what you had done previously with Metz and myself, to sort of set the framework or the background for what we're going to be doing. So we have looked at the 5E structure of teaching, and we've looked at the 5 E's. But before I look at that, I wanted to just remind ourselves of what it is that we want to see in the ideal lesson. And I want to just look quickly at what, let me just see if I can share the screen before I, planning for learning, that's the one. Okay, can you see my screen? You should be able to see my screen. And this slide I have up here, let's do this. All right, can you see this slide? You should be able to see my screen. Excellent. All right. Now, I know that we have been talking about planning, lesson planning in particular, and I wanted to just look quickly at levels of planning before I go into what I wanted to do today, to set a sort of background. Now, we have spent some time, you have spent some time looking at lesson planning. We may not have spent a lot of time looking at unit planning, but I know that wherever you are in your institutions, there are these 3 levels that must be considered when you're teaching. And because we have such limited time, I want to just spend some time this morning ensuring that we are on the same page as relates to the lesson plan. Now, your lesson plan is perhaps your most important document that you're going to generate. You're going to create this. And there are some elements that I want us to be clear about. Now, the area that we're going to be focusing on is this area of presentation and delivery. It is here that you're going to see evidence of the 5E model or whatever other concept model we're going to be dealing with. All right? Sorry, let's go back. So in your lesson plan, however, we have what we call general information, and that general information really speaks to issues such as who are these persons. So if it's your grade 8 or your grade 9 class that you're dealing with, instructional strategies. What are those instructional strategies that you have, that you're using? And we have spent some time, and you have spent some time last week looking at some of these strategies and methods. The objectives of the lesson, what are they? And in particular, we're looking at the specific objectives, and Metz would have spent some time last week looking at the Bloom's taxonomy and how to write objectives. Okay, so you are familiar with that, and then you want to look at content. Now, when we speak of content, we're asking you to put in place or indicate the key concepts that the lesson will relate to, or what relate to the lesson. What are the key concepts that students are going to be, you want them to learn? And people go about writing the content in different ways. For the purposes of this exercise, I would suggest that you make them bullet points, and so that you don't spend a long time writing copious notes, copious pages of information. This previous knowledge, we're going to look at these specifically when we look at examples, but this previous knowledge speaks to what is it that you think you're building on? What are the concepts that you're building on that you want the students to be able to come away with? And sorry, you're building on so that you can, your lesson is going to be premised on those key ideas. And then this part now, the presentation and delivery, is the key focus of your lesson. It is here that you'll have your introduction, your development, your closure. All right? So the next area you might want to indicate, if you do have such, would be your homework. What homework activities would you want the students to take away? And this self-evaluation is not written up on your lesson plan. It is an indication that at the end of the lesson, you would do some sort of evaluation of what you have done. So it's your reflection on your lesson to indicate how you would go forward. So for the purposes of, let's say, this assignment that you will do, this will not feature on your lesson plan, because you would not have taught the lesson. You would rather be planning it. But in your teaching, when you're on your practicum, one expects that you would have some sort of evaluation component at the end of each lesson. And this doesn't have to be 5 or 6 pages. It depends on what you're looking at. It could be a paragraph or 2. And usually, what this evaluation is asking you to do is to indicate what you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the lesson that you have taught. What would you want to take forward? What do you think you need to address? This is your own personal space that you're thinking about, your own reflective activities that you're putting down so as to inform you to go forward. Now, I will perhaps say some more about this when we see you at the workshops in a few weeks' time. But it is this evaluation that you're going to return to over the period of your, let's say, your practicum period, to think about, what are the aspects that have worked for you. And you're going to find that this becomes very useful in your next course, which is your practicum. So what am I saying? I'm really saying that the self-evaluation is not necessary for the assignment that you're going to be asked to do, but it is necessary when you're teaching. Okay? A very important part of the teaching. So your lesson plan really has these elements. Now, I'm using my language very carefully, because the truth of the matter is that there are many different ways to structure it. These are the elements. We're going to look at how it can be structured, and I'm sure you would have already been familiar with some other strategies that would have been shared with you earlier. I just thought I would share this slide with you because of what it has to offer. Now, for those persons who have been writing lesson plans and have been using these over the years, is there anything else that you would normally include in your plan which is not here? Anything else that you would normally include in your plan that's not here? Anybody else? So we're good?
Samuel, Dominica.
Yes, Samuel, go ahead.
I'm not sure whether the materials will come under the general information.
Yes, you could in fact put it there, but you could have a separate slot. That's a good point. You might in fact make a different subheading called materials, resources. Excellent. So you may want to add that.
Under resources, you may also include your references if you use any.
Correct, correct. All right. Now, let us just talk a bit about the lesson plan. The lesson plan, well, let's come out of this aboard. This is the lesson plan. I should say something about no, let me go back to the unit plan a bit. The unit plan really is a bigger document that you will have to spend some time preparing for your practicum. And one of the things that we will do when we meet with you in the workshop is to sort of help you to begin to scope this work. And you will do some of this with your practicum supervisor as well as your cooperating teacher if you're going into the school, or your head of department if you're already in a school. Okay, so the unit plan, you're going to get some more time to work with this, because this does require a bit more work, but pretty much it speaks to for your unit plan. You need to think about why you're doing this unit and what is the value of this unit of work. And pretty much you want to think deeply about what are the concepts and the skills that you want students to learn. So it requires a knowledge of the curriculum and a knowledge of the subject area generally. Now, the lesson plan is, as I have said, it is developed, the skill is developed over time. And so I don't want you to feel pressured, but it is an important document. It does require knowledge of pupils and understanding of the content to be taught. So if you haven't been teaching, you may find this a little bit challenging, primarily in terms of making a selection as to how much can be done in a particular time. How much can you really fit into an 80 minutes lesson? That takes experience. It doesn't just happen by just thinking about it. And so my recommendation would be for you to perhaps have a look at some of the plans that are available online and look to see how much people put in. Now, what you're going to find is that a number of people will have different levels of detail when you think of a plan. And so you may not get the sort of standard that you're looking at. But I have put 3 lesson plans online so far by a teacher called JC. You might have seen them. That's the sort of level that I'm aiming at for this course in terms of what you're required to put in, the kind of detail. So look at JC's lesson plans. We will come back to them on Thursday, but that will give you some guidelines as to the kind of depth. We'll talk a bit about format in a little while, but that's the depth I want you to focus on, and I'll come back to that plan. So you need to have an awareness of the topics taught previously and the results of such instruction. Now, in the case of your written assignment, you don't really have any knowledge of what that would be because you're doing a hypothetical case. But you should be able to say, if I'm going to teach this topic, students really ought to have these knowledge of these concepts. That's as far as you can go for this section. Now, although it's a personal document, it is something that can possibly or may possibly be used by other teachers. So it should be written in a form that is somewhat formal, because you are using this it's your personal document, but others may have to look at it, such as your head of department. So it should conform to some standards, hence the structure. It should be clear, it should be concise, and it should indicate the estimated time for the different segments of the lesson. We're going to come to that when we look at some samples. All right? Now, I just want to look at 3 components that you may or you may not have met before in order to help us move from here to where I want us to go. Firstly, the business of what we call the orientation set. Now, the orientation set or is the beginning or is the introduction, and that is usually your engage phase of your lesson. All right. So it's normally at the beginning of a new concept. So if you're going to teach something for the first time, you will perhaps have a stronger orientation set. So your introduction, your orientation set, your engage phase, they play the same role. And the role here is to create receptive attitudes for the introduction of new materials, to focus the students, and to stimulate them to visualize new content. It should capture the students' interest and imagination and should not take too long for delivery. So this phase of your lesson should be about 8 to 10 minutes. And it is this orientation set or lesson introduction that you're going to be developing for a part of your final assignment. And you're going to share this. Okay, so if we're dealing with the 5E model, this is the engage phase of your lesson plan. All right, and it does the same purpose. If you could remember, can anybody remind us as to what the engage phase is supposed to do? Go back with what Metz did with you last week. Yeah. Who wants to remind us?
Does it have something to do with making meaningful learning?
Yes, but what exactly do you recall? Do you recall at all what the engage phase is supposed to do? Do you have access to the PowerPoints that were done last week?
You should grab the student's attention and stimulate interest in learning the subject.
Yes, it should. I'm going to bring up another screen. Let's see if I can find it from what Metz did last week. All right. Can you see the screen or should I? Can you see what I have on my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. So it is the first stage, engagement phases, teacher or curriculum task. Assesses students' prior knowledge, helps them to become engaged in a new concept through the use of short activities that promote curiosity and elicit prior knowledge. So in this phase, orientation set phase, the engage phase, this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to, remember now, you're connecting the learner. You're connecting what the learner has done to what you're going to do next. So remember, you're making this bridge. So you have to move the learner to where you want that person to be. So you have to build on what the learner has in place. So you have to think about how do you use prior knowledge? What do you know about what the student is coming in with? What knowledge base does the student have? And how can I use that to pivot the learner to where I want him or her to go next? All right, so that is the first phase. It's an engage phase, and we're going to look at some of the possibilities as how you can do this. But certainly, this phase is one of the most important phases of your lesson, the engage phase. All right, it's where you begin, and we want to do more than ask students questions to say what they know about the content. That's what you are going to be teaching. That's a part of eliciting prior knowledge. But there must be some engaging activity that you're going to involve the students in to get them to think about where you want them to go. All right? And that's the orientation set. The second phase, well, let's go back to my planning screen. Now, in this, so this is what I've said before. It should be structured so that students can recall what they already know, and they can understand, non-understand, and the relevance of what they will learn and be aware of what they be able to do. So that's pretty much what you're doing in this phase. The second phase is the, let's go back a little. There are some other aspects of the teaching that perhaps may not have come out specifically last week, which I want to make sure you get. Now, this is about the actual teaching. And when we meet, we'll talk a bit some more about the what we call the transition set. The transition set is the sort of set of actions that help to link information. So in teaching, what you're doing now is you're ensuring that the information that you present is always linked to what you're going to do next. It is an important, you need to be aware that you need to be constantly doing this so as to prevent the fragmentation or the fragmentary approach to learning we spoke about when I spoke with you during the first week. When things go into long-term memory, you want them to go in an organized and an ordered way so that students can retrieve them in that ordered way. And so at different points in your lesson, you're going to be making sure that this is happening. So you see, okay, students, today we have so far been looking at this business of chemical bonding. And we want to now use what we know about bonding to write chemical formulae. So immediately you have made a statement, just a sentence that links bonding to writing chemical formulae. And that could be considered a transition set. So it's just the sort of phrases, the sort of actions, the sort of steps that you take in your lesson to link information. And my point here is not in your lesson plan, but it's something that you think about as you teach. And we will look at that some more by way of looking through the plans. Let's go down to the end. So your lesson has all of this, your beginning. In the beginning of your lesson is your orientation set. It has a middle and it has an end. So if I'm to use the 5E model, in the middle, you'd have your explore, you'd have your explain, and you'd have your elaborate. So you have your explore phase, your explain phase, and your elaborate phase. So you're going to do all of that in the middle. And the end, the easiest way to do it is at the end, evaluation, but it doesn't have to come at the end. It could sometimes be interwoven right through as a sort of summative evaluation, but sometimes you do summative and then you end up with formative evaluation. So let's go now. So the beginning is your engage phase, which is where you'd have your orientation set. The middle is where you're developing the concept. And it is here you'd first go to explore, then explain, then elaborate. And I'm saying that the end is where you would likely find your evaluation phase of your lesson. Though you could have evaluation woven throughout your lesson by way of formative evaluation. That's my point. Okay? But most times, teachers end with some form of summative evaluation in your lesson, though it may be short. So in the middle, pupils take the active role. And you see teacher and students playing different roles. But in the middle phase, you must give students time to play some active role at some place. And at the end, you may have shared roles, but certainly you end with some sort of closure of your ideas, where students get a sense of what it is that they have done. So that is how you could relate the 5E model to your lesson plan. The beginning phase is your engage. The middle phase, you have the other three E's: explore, explain, and elaborate. And the end is your evaluation phase. All right? Now, I want to make another point about, sorry, let's go back here. So in your session with METS over the past week or two, you have looked at the exploration phase. And in the exploration phase, we looked at engage first, explore. Let's make this bigger so you can see properly. Slideshow, current slide. So these are the experiences that provide students with some base. It is here that you're giving them a chance to unpack ideas, etc., etc. Okay? And they may do a number of things here. They may complete laboratory activities. They design and conduct preliminary investigations. So your explore phase is giving them a chance to explore the concepts. I'm just recapping what METS has done with you. All right, it's the second stage. The third, and in the explore phase, you want to bear in mind as well. Just give me a sec here. Let me just bring up my other. In this phase, both teachers and learners will perhaps have an input. So the learner is making predictions, hypothesizing, exploring resources, designing, developing. The teacher's role here is to probe, to prod, to make suggestions, to ask them to think about it, to provide resources, to provide feedback. Okay, but the student is taking an active role in this section of the lesson, and you're giving them the chance to do so. All right. In the third phase, which is the explanation phase, perhaps here the teacher may take on a more dominant role. The learner clarifies understanding discovered, reaches conclusions. Okay, and again, here it is here that you make some effort to ensure that concepts are learned and understood. Okay, so it provides opportunities for teachers to directly introduce concept, skills, or processes. It is here that you ensure that concepts are explained. So where there are gaps, the students must get that in this phase of the lesson. All right? And the learners as well explain their understanding. All right? The elaboration phase is where you extend further. So what you do now is you broaden the idea. In the expand phase or the elaboration phase, the learner applies these, what you want the learner to do here is to apply these conclusions or generalizations to solve some problems. You make decisions, okay? So the new experiences that students develop and broader understanding, more information, adequate skills. So the teacher challenges the student to go beyond what it is. So you apply. So here it is that you want students to take what they have learned and understood into a new context. We will see how we can do this in a couple lessons. So you're applying understanding with additional activities. And in the final stage, in the evaluation phase, it is here that the students teacher assesses understanding, and you try to ensure that the students they demonstrate what they understand by producing some tangible in some tangible way what they have learned. All right? So pretty much what I'm saying in a nutshell is that, let's come out of here now. What I'm saying in a nutshell is that if you go back to our lesson here, in this phase, this is where you're going to concentrate now on your beginning, your middle, and your end. All right? So what we have here, this is where you're going to put your beginning, middle, and end. In your beginning phase is your engage phase. The middle phase has the 3 of the E's, and in the final phase, it is your evaluation phase. And we're going to write now our lesson plans to fit this structure. All right, everybody's clear? Any questions that we need to ask?
So,
Yeah, go ahead, Ava.
Yeah, sorry about that. You mentioned that in the engagement phase, you generally take around 8 to 10 minutes.
Yes.
I'm thinking if we're doing an inquiry
Yes.
approach, wouldn't that take a longer time than that, or that's just a ballpark? Because I'm thinking if you have activities planned for the engagement phase, like if you're doing something like especially maybe a demonstration,
Yes.
that might take a longer time than that, or just based on the approach that you take.
Right. It depends on the approach that you take, but you don't want your introduction to take up half of your lesson. All right, you really want your introduction to be just that, an introduction, but you have to make it tight. And hopefully we'll look at some examples as to how we can actually do this, so you can see what it is that we mean. I have some videos we want to look at, and there are some things online as well we want to look at. So we will get a chance to sort of tweak it and look at it and see, okay, which ones work. But it does depend on your strategy that you use. A lot of it has to do with strategy. Samuel, you were asking.
Yes. I want some clarification. The second stage you said is the exploration stage. Is it possible for explanation to be in the second stage? And from one of the courses we've done before is that the specific objectives comes under explanation. But under explanation, you will explain to the student the specific objective that will take place. So please, can you try to clarify that area?
All right. You're talking now about the actual teaching. All right. You're teaching the lesson.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we're looking at the 5E model, remember now, the 5E model is an inquiry-based model. Right, Samuel? And if we're thinking about inquiry-based, we're looking usually at a more inductive approach to teaching and learning. And I hope the language is not, by now you're familiar with that. So let us see if we understand what we're saying. Where we started off by talking about inquiry instruction, we looked at the theory. You did an assignment for me, which I hope I can turn it. You will have your marks. You'll have some grades by Thursday, so you'll have a chance to look at it before you do the next piece. All right. So inquiry now is helping students to explore in ways that's more inductive. And if you recall what we mean by inductive, Samuel, what do we mean by inductive? When I say inductive, what am I talking about?
That's when you go from specific to general.
You go and give me in a nutshell now, explain what that means.
Yes,
practically you're teaching, yes.
Okay, it's a type of reasoning where you take the student from specific example
Yes.
to a general example.
All right.
So that means from a specific example of what you want to teach,
yes,
to the broad topic, to the broad generalization of the topic.
All right. So then now, if you hold that understanding, then you can understand now why the explore phase should come before the explain phase. Can you see that? Can you
Yes.
see that it is out of the exploration that you perhaps have the specific examples that you want to, so exploring the concepts, and then having explored them, then you come now with what does it really mean, and you clarify at that stage. So that's the 5E model. Okay? So that's hence the sequence. So your first question was, it is at the explain phase that you introduce the specific objectives. Now, I want to be clear that I understand what you're asking me in that stage. Are you asking me that, is your question based on the fact that you would want to share with the students what the objectives are for the lesson, and you'd wait until that phase to say what those are? Is that what you're asking?
Like, I'm trying to clarify whether the second stage can also be the explain, because
All right.
in your explanation you said the second stage is exploration.
Yes.
I'm asking whether the second stage can also be an explain stage.
And I'm saying that if we're following the 5E model, which is inductive in its orientation, the answer to that question is no. But if you're using a deductive model to instruction, then explain would come before explore. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you get the difference?
Yes.
If you're doing, if it's deductive, then explain is where you start. If it is inductive, explore is where you start. You understand? Now,
yes.
I am using 5E because I want us to understand it for the assignment. But I'm also going to look at a deductive approach to instruction, which would not be necessarily for this assignment, but you may choose to teach some concepts using the deductive model. All right? But for now, I'm looking at the 5E model. And in the 5E model, explore comes before explain. In the deductive model, it is explain before explore. All right? Because you start off with this is, and then you apply the this is to what it is that you want them to know, and then you take it further. All right? So that's the sequence. And with respect to your objectives now, your learning objectives, when you start teaching, when you're actually in the classroom, you're giving students information as to what they are going to do, you really ought to share with them what it is that you're going to be doing in this class today. All right, and I'm sorry, I haven't modeled that very well in this session. But essentially, you really should have your objectives for the students to say, in today's class, I want you to be able to do A, B, and C, and here's where we're going in this lesson today. And usually, the requirement is that you write it so that students can actually see where it is that you want them to go in the lesson. Now, that would perhaps come early, even before your orientation set. All right? Or just after your orientation set, depending on the nature of the orientation set or the engage activity, because if you put the objectives up front before, you may reduce the element of surprise that might be likely you'd want to create in some engage activities. All right? So you may want to, ballpark, I guess what we could say is that those objectives should come either before or after the engage phase. They're just before or just after the engage phase, depending on the sort of mood or atmosphere you want to create in your class. All right? Any other questions?
Jason from Bermuda, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, Jason.
Kind of similar, but one is related to the objectives. With writing objectives, we've been learning that we should cover 3 domains like cognitive, psychomotor, and affective.
Yes.
But I was wondering if it's necessary to cover each of those domains in every lesson, or could it be like over a period of several lessons that you cover those? Yes.
And the answer to your question is the latter point that you made, and it's yes. It is very difficult to always have the 3 domains in any one lesson. It is not as easy as one might want it to appear. My preference is, my expectation is that when you're teaching a concept normally over a period of time, so think of it as teaching a particular concept. And if you're going to be dealing with this over 2 or 3 lessons, then during those 2 or 3 lessons, you would expect to see the 3 sets of objectives. If, however, you're dealing with a concept that is going to be taught in, let's say, 1 lesson, and this is in this lesson today, we're going to be learning, I don't know, we're going to be learning, what should we learn in just one 80-minute lesson? How to use the microscope. You could perhaps do that in an 80-minute lesson. Then within that lesson, then you might find that you have all 3, because it's easy now to do this. But if you're doing something over time, then I don't necessarily expect that you would be able. If you can, good for you. But I think it is reasonable to expect that you would see evidence of the 3 levels, 3 domains across the period of time of teaching this concept. I hope that helps.
Okay, yeah, and then my next question is basically the same thing, but with regards to the different steps of the 5E model.
Yes.
Like, in each lesson, should we cover each step, or like maybe you get through the engage,
yes,
explore, explain, but then maybe the extending, the elaboration, maybe that would be done in the next lesson or something? Is that possible? Or?
That's a very good question as well. And usually, when we think of the 5E model, it doesn't necessarily apply to a lesson, but it does require similarly to the teaching of a particular concept. So it will really go over time. So what I'm asking you to do is really a challenging task, because you're being asked, technically, your assignment should span more than 1 lesson. So I should really ask you to do about 3 lessons to teach this particular concept. But I'm doing this in the interest of time. But so technically, you wouldn't normally have the 5 E's, because it does take time. I think it was you who said it, Ava, that it does take time to explore. The explore phase of your lesson could take a good 45 minutes. All right. So what we're doing here is we're writing this lesson plan, and we're using it almost in ideal. You're making it as putting it in an ideal context, which you perhaps wouldn't have in a real context, because you wouldn't be able to do all of what you're doing in the time. But I'm asking you to create it for the purpose of the assignment. All right?
Right, okay.
Yeah. But you would normally have it over time.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. All right. So we're clear now. So we're differentiating between this exercise and what would happen come September when you go into the classroom to actually teach. All right. So then we have done the 5E review, and I want now to have you look at this video. Now it's a little bit over. It's a bit more than. We look at it for writing the 5E lesson, and it's about 14 minutes. So I'm going to ask you to just look at it for the next 10 minutes. We'll stop in 10 minutes, and then we can come back. So this is another take on how to write your 5E lesson plan. And this gentleman provides. It's not. He doesn't. His voice is not very exciting, but spend 10 minutes and listen to it for me, please. And then we'll regroup after 10 minutes. All right. Would you like me to? If I click on it, you can see it? Let's see if you can.
Could you paste the link into the chat?
It's actually in. Okay, you're not. Okay, I can do that.
Oh, it's in that presentation.
It's in Orveli. All right, let's do that so you can do it. I'll do that.
What's it under?
It's called 5. I'll
Pardon?
tell you what it's called. I'll tell you what it's called.
Thank you.
It's called there are a number of writing the 5E lesson plan, But let me just do it in the chat as you
Yes,
can.
okay.
I see that. Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
that's the one. Okay, guys, I'm pretty sure you can stop now. I mean, you can look at this beyond the session. That was just to reinforce what we had been saying. And I don't know if you had got very far in terms of you were able to, because I wasn't watching at the same time with you, if you were able to get to the end, well, not to the end, but where she began to explain the different phases of the lesson. Did you get to did you see that? Did you get as far as
Yes.
All right, fine. You could have a look at the video to the end, and I think it will give you an even better understanding of what I had been saying this morning as to how to include the various components of the 5E model in. You would have noticed that she used a tabular format to write her lesson, the lesson plan, and that works fine with me, but it need not be a tabular format. You could do it by section. So you have engage, explore, explain, etc. So you don't need to use a table, though a table might work for some persons better. She made a point up front where she was talking about the state standards as you know, differentiating between the state standards and the objectives. That's important for you to remember as well, because when we think of the objectives, you will likely, I'm sure, be going to a document to find the objectives, depending on where you're teaching. But you want to be sure that you adhere to the principles of writing good objectives. She spoke about them being measurable. She spoke about the verbs and the outcomes. All right. So I'm hoping you found that little, what I call summary, useful, because it would sort of help to guide you as to the steps to take when you're writing the plan for your final assignment. Any questions?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, go ahead, Jason.
I was wondering if we could get some more, I mean, maybe we could just look in, or I could just look into it myself, but like concrete ways on how to assess the student's prior knowledge or to determine their prior knowledge.
All right.
Like she mentioned that activity, but she didn't really describe how it would work.
Okay.
So I mean, like other than just asking questions, like you said, how can we, have activities, that assess.
All right. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, questions clearly is one good way, but another way you could do it actually is you could involve them in, well, pretty much any of the if you think of written activities. I'm gonna put some things, some diagrammatic formats up for you. I thought I had put it up, but I hadn't. For example, you could give them a concept map with some blanks in it. So you could give them an incomplete concept map, not too complicated, but something to give them an opportunity to complete the missing parts. Now, the thing with concept mapping is most useful when students are required to put in the linking words. All right? It is in the linking of ideas that you're able to see how they relate the concepts. So you say you have the concept man and you have the concept mammal. All right? Now there are many different ways that you can make connections between man and mammal. When you give the students an opportunity to suggest ways in which you can link them, then you get an idea of what their understanding is for those two concepts. So that's one way.
Okay.
You could use an introductory activity that has have students complete a concept map. You might have them complete a story So depending on what it is that you're doing, some things may be more useful than others. But the concept cartoons might also be another good way to check prior understanding and possible misconceptions. And these are just some examples. But primarily you're going to be using questions. Questions, though, don't just have to be, what do you think about? You can ask questions in different ways. You could, for example, as well, show a short video and ask them to predict something. Or you could do a short demonstration and ask them to predict what they might expect, or what could you use instead of. Those are the sorts of creative ways that you can think about. So you just I'm sure just by talking about it, you've begun to think, oh yeah, and different ways. So that's the sort of thing you try to do. All right. Any other questions?
I also had a question about inquiry.
Yes.
The inquiry method, I guess. I was wondering, couldn't that be used to, like, instead of just inductive, couldn't that be falsification in a sense? Because you're starting with you start with the problem.
Yes.
As opposed to you don't have to start with an observation. I mean, you could just start with the problem and then have them.
Yes, in fact, you could. You could. That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
All right. All right. So that was just a sort of recapping, a background to make sure we're all grounded. And I guess in a sense, this would be the prior knowledge component of the lesson, the engage phase of the lesson, if we're looking at it like that. That's what that first phase was about. And I want to make, before I go further, I want to ask you to spend a little time to just share something for me. I want you to think about your ideal lesson. All right, and we have been doing a lot in terms of what the lesson should look like, and I really should have checked this morning to see if everybody's here. I just forgot that I am not hearing from everybody, but now I have an opportunity to hear from everyone. Linton, Vanessa, are you there? I have seen and heard from all the others.
Linton is there.
Yes, and Vanessa? Is Vanessa there, Tracy?
I don't see her up on the screen.
Okay. All right.
So I don't know.
All right. The listening is being.
I can't answer for her.
Has anybody heard from her since morning? All right. All right. Let's put a thing right here now. So we're not sure about Vanessa. Okay. Now I want you, each of you know, you can each really respond. I want to think about your ideal lesson. All right. From the perspective of the teacher and from the perspective of the learner. And I want you to just jot down one thing. Yeah, write it so we can all see it on our screen. So you're going to share your screen for me. I want you to jot down one thing that you want to see in that lesson from the perspective of the teacher or the student. So you could one for each, and I want you to think of your ideal lesson. What must be in that ideal lesson? And it can be an experience, whatever you want to choose, but for you, this is important in any lesson from the perspective of the teacher and the perspective of the student. What do you want to see in that lesson? It's your ideal lesson. One thing. Teacher, student. And we're going to share our screens. Ready? Let me give you another minute or so. Okay, who will go first? Let's go. Linton, let's hear from you. Haven't heard from you since morning.
Okay. Actually, I didn't have time right
Okay.
on the computer, so I wouldn't be able to share my screen. But
okay.
All right. But what I wrote idly from my lesson for the teacher. I would like that the teacher should really. I'm supposed to engage the students.
I don't know what that means. Yes, tell me what that means.
Right. That is to create an interest in the students towards the topic, and also to generate curiosity of the topic of study from the students.
Okay.
So I believe that now, again, with a lot of the YouTube videos and different teaching aid that is available with technology, again, I guess, well, at the beginning of the class, a teacher should be able to engage the students, catch their curiosity, and have them alert to the topic that you want to
all right, so deliver. Pretty much you need a lesson where the teacher engages the students. All right, students are engaged. All right, so is that from the perspective of the teacher or the students?
The teacher.
All right, so you're saying the teacher should carry out steps then to ensure that students are engaged. What about the students?
Okay, for the students, they should be kind of receptive to actually receive whatever the teacher is doing. For example, most times you find that the teacher now will put a lot of emphasis in preparing, and the students' attitudes towards picking up whatever information that you want to give to deliver to the students, they're not willing to accept. So I would want in that lesson plan that the students are very receptive and they participate in the lesson.
All right, so your ideal lesson, the teacher should be carrying out steps to ensure that students are engaged, and your students should show evidence of being receptive, being ready to learn. All right, so that's your ideal lesson. All right. This thing says my connection is unstable, but let's go. Tracy, let's hear from you.
I was on the same page as Linton. I want the students to be engaged from the minute they walk in the door to the minute they leave. I just want to like look at them, and I want them to say, to be looking at me and not down on their papers doodling or off in some other space. When you said the learner, I did me as the learner, not as what the student. So for me, I want the strategies to be changed constantly, or a little bit of change, because if the class goes like the same tone the whole way, for me, I have a short attention span apparently, because within half an hour I could be looking out the window. So I appreciate that in students as well. So I guess got to keep watching your students, I guess.
All right.
And I know I can definitely tune out quick.
Yes, I understand that. All right, thanks, Tracy. Ava, let's hear from you.
Okay then. Let me open that. Oh, sorry about that.
That's fine.
As you had up your screen, I was hoping that you would take it down to see, but I can think. I want the students to be able to make connection between the lesson that I'm teaching and their real life experiences to be applicable to them, to be relevant to their lives. And for the teacher, I want to be able to help the students to develop critical thinking skills so that they become independent learners, not always depend on the teacher for everything. They will take ownership and take charge of their learning.
All right. So you're talking about critical thinking and you're thinking about making connections, making the learning real. Okay.
Yes.
Samuel? Samuel?
Let me share this, my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I wrote, as a student in the developmental stage, I'll always want to be able to carry out the step-by-step in understanding the concept that have been taught. I'm thinking more of a practical. And as a teacher, able to connect student prior knowledge to the concept to be taught is one thing I always want to accomplish in my class. How to connect what they know to what I want to teach in the class.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Samuel.
Welcome.
And Jason?
I kind of basically said the same thing that Ava said, but so I said for the teacher, to motivate students to learn through including instruction and content that are relevant to the students' lives.
Mm-hmm.
And for the students, I would hope that their lives would be enriched by learning science for them personally and for them to be able to help others. And I guess that's kind of big, but yeah, one of the things I was thinking of was critical thinking and helping them to be creative and problem solving and to be able to be scientifically literate to make decisions that will affect their lives or the world around them based on the scientific understanding that they have.
All right. Thank you very much. And Ashley, you're the last one.
See my screen? Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, Ashley, I can.
Thank you. Basically, I said from the teacher's perspective, in an ideal lesson, students would be engaged through discussion, questioning, and thinking, and their thinking processes. And then from the student's perspective, I figured that it would be ideal if students felt empowered or like they go away with information that generates a feeling of curiosity, like a curiosity, like wanting to know more, basically, and a drive for creativity with the information that they just discovered.
Very good. All right. So, and that's pretty decent and very important and useful. I ask you to do this because it is important that we recognize that we need to have some sort of real purpose focus around which we're going to plan. And it is out of this that we're going to be able to come up with the sort of activities, the sort of engagement activities that will allow the students to do what we want them to do. And in a real sense, I wanted to use this to sort of segue to look at, well, if you look at all that you have said, you have all looked at the importance of the learner being engaged and the teacher making steps to ensure that that takes place. And you have moved on for the learner, from the learner's perspective, to address the importance of the learner coming away with not just the knowledge in that sense, but in a real sense, be able to use that knowledge in a novel context. You spoke about the business of applying it to real life, and actually you spoke about it being helping them to move on, to be empowered, to become more curious. All right, and the notion of ensuring that the learner is factored into what you're saying is important. I want to make the point that without thinking about the learner, you're not going to be effective as teachers. And I'm really happy that you have given some thought to what it is that you want this learner to achieve and to accomplish. The fact of the matter is that we are teaching students. We are not just teaching the curriculum. So yes, you're going to be teaching some science. You're going to be teaching, I don't know, genetics, bonding. You're going to be teaching whatever you're going to be teaching. That's true. But really, you are teaching students. And it is how you make that information real to the student that you're being challenged to do. How do you help them to appreciate the information? And so as you think about doing this, so you have to think about two levels: the student and the material that you want them to learn. And to a great extent, how you package that material is what's going to address that outcome. We've been talking about how you package it in terms of how you write your lesson plan. We've talked about how you package it in terms of how you think about the concepts and you organize it in terms of your concept maps. And we've talked about the strategies for teaching, to tap into the learner's prior knowledge, to tap into their interests, and to be able to get them excited and interested. There is a lot to be said about how you organize, because depending on who the learners are, how you organize might be intimidating or it might be useful. For example, some of us like to know where we are going. If we don't know where we're going, we're not going to go with you. Some of us don't mind going along and finding out what's happening as we go along. All right? You've got to remember that there are different sets of students in your class. And therefore, you can't always be ambiguous, hoping for the big wow at the end. But you have to remember to present the scaffolds to help them to figure out where you're going to, because it's a journey. It's a mystery that you have to help to unfold. And how you do that is the craft of teaching. That is really where the rubber hits the road. And so, in a sense, what we're asking you to do is to pull now all of those things together that we have just been learning and say, "Oh, how does this work?" Well, there's an article that I'm going up to a break. I'm just giving you a last 5 minutes and then take a short break. There is an article in the set of documents by Lang and Evans that I want you to look at. Can you see this? Are you all seeing my screen?
Not yet.
Let's see now, what have I done wrong? Let's do this. Models and strategies. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, we are.
All right, no, I don't expect for you to read this. I'm just showing you it because I want to point you to a number of things. This is an article by, it's not an article, it's a chapter of their book by, it's uploaded for you. All right, so you will see a folder by Lang and Evans and in Orville, and you're going to find chapter 9 particularly useful if you have a read of it. All right, so I'm just giving you some guides now as to how else you can begin to think about it. It really speaks about teaching concepts, and it addresses the different kinds of concepts. We had looked at concrete and abstract concepts, and I had mentioned that there were these different types, and there's this hierarchy. So you might want to look at this chapter. When I spoke, when we had a session last, we had this discussion. All right, I want to take you down though to just talk a bit about that's just a structure that they have used to help you to classify the concepts. And I want to just spend a little time looking at this. You will find, I have been speaking about concepts, and we talked a bit about what those are. Now, this business of critical attributes, I want you to spend some time, whatever you're going to teach, and think about this notion of what are the critical attributes. So if you're going to be teaching students about a chemical bond or the process of bonding, the question you ask yourself now, what are the key things that the students must understand? What is it that they must understand? What constitutes a chemical bond? What must I ensure that they grasp to know the difference between a chemical change and a physical change? And how do I relate those two in teaching? These kinds of questions you have got to ask yourselves when you begin to plan to teach, to ensure that experiences that you just talked about, students will get. And there are some that are non-critical. So if we skip away from, let us move away from the chemical bond, and let's look at a simple concept such as a chair. Okay, a chair must have something to sit on. Okay, it must have a seat. Okay, it must have some support. All right, now typically a chair can accommodate one person. So what I call a chair is perhaps what you're all sitting on right now. It's different from a sofa or a bench or a stool, though all of those you can sit on. All right? So being able to sit on it is not the only attribute of the concept chair. All right? There are many other attributes that come together to be able to define and describe the concept chair. Now, so it is with the concepts in science. You've got to be able to unpack those and to help students to appreciate what is the difference. And then there is the non-critical attributes. So it doesn't really matter if the chair is blue or red or green. That's not what makes it a chair. It doesn't matter if it's made of wood or it's made of metal. It doesn't matter if the seat is padded. You get the point? You understand what I'm saying? So in dealing with your concepts, you need to help students to make these distinctions. And it is in the explore and expand phases of your lesson that these distinctions become evident. All right? So when you finish, they must come away with an understanding of what we mean by this and what are the examples. So students need this sort of information. As you plan to teach, therefore, I want you to begin to think about helping students to come up with this sort of deep conceptual understanding. That's the first thing I want to say about this chapter that I want you to focus on and to look at. All right? It speaks about different kinds of concepts, and you might want to read around that. I want to come down now to, there's a lesson structure. And they talk about how to plan for concept teaching. And they speak of, firstly, examining the concept hierarchy. A concept map helps you here, and we spoke about superordinate and subordinate and coordinate concepts. Okay? They say you should look to see if it's an abstract concept or a concrete concept, conjunctive, disjunctive, relational, and you want to read that in the chapter. Okay? Determine the learner readiness. So you want to determine now, is it something that I want to show them? Is it something that I want them to do? Is it something that I can represent symbolically? How am I going to show this concept? How are they going to learn it? What must it look like? So can they dramatize it? Can they visualize it? Can they use it in some way? Can they represent it as a diagram? How will they represent it? All right? And then you ask yourself some questions. What exactly do they want to know? What is an atom? What is homeostasis? What are the critical attributes if I'm going to speak to students about assimilation? What do they have to know? And then you decide now, what are the things that they're important, but they're not really critical? Because you see, it is at 5, the non-critical, that a lot of students get lost with misconceptions. Because they get caught up in the non-essentials. And sometimes this takes place because of the way we present the concept. So for example, let me give you an example. You tell a story or you use an analogy to show how it is that bonding takes place. And you just happen to use a marriage as your analogy. And you further go on to talk about Tom and Mary getting married. And then Tom and Mary getting married becomes, in the student's mind, what is essential, what is critical, when it really isn't. Sometimes that happens because of how much time you spend talking about Tom and Mary in the lesson. And we spend sometimes more time on the minor things and neglect the major things. So you could say you major on the minor and you minor on the major. So this thing, the non-critical attributes, they are important to identify. And you have to make sure that students can differentiate between what's critical and what's not so critical. Okay? A lot of this comes with experience and knowing how students think. You develop the concept definition. What is it I'm trying to teach? And you sequence now, this part now. You decide now, this is your planning, How am I going to sequence this? What am I going to go do first, next, then next? Okay, you select your sequence. Am I going to give them some examples? Am I going to show them what it is I want them to do? I want to give them many examples and then show them what is not. And then you determine some way to introduce and develop the concept. So this planning comes ahead of teaching. This planning is critical if you're going to be effective teachers. You must at least be very clear about what concepts you're going to teach, how they relate to other concepts, how you're going to sequence them, how you're going to help students distinguish between one and the other. What's the best way to present it? What's the best way to sequence it? What's the best way for students to understand it? And this is important. All right? That's your planning. The other thing I want to take you to, before I give you a chance to have a read of the chapter, you do that for Thursday. There's another, you hear there's a lesson. Okay? Now, as I have said, many of these will vary depending on who is writing them. And this is a lesson plan, which is, one might consider it a very simple lesson plan. It doesn't have the kind of detail that I would necessarily want to see you in yours, because I have to ask you some questions in yours. But certainly it has all the elements that I want to see. So you see the topic. Here's what they're doing. This is your lesson. In your lesson topic, you have identified what it is that the students are doing, the objectives, and it shows you what they will be able to do, identify, it gives you the context, and it gives you the outcome. Okay? It says what it is that they're familiar with, the prerequisite student learning, what do they have, what do they come knowing. It doesn't give us materials, Samuel, but one could insert that here. Okay? And resources. But you see it has the three distinct sections of the lesson that I spoke about: a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it says, ask students whether they heard about the recent meteor shower and what they know about it. May be relevant depending on the context. So we're talking about how it is that we can introduce a lesson. Apparently, if this is something which is relevant to the students because something might have happened, you connect it to something that they can relate to. That's what that does. And then questions are used to discover students' knowledge of the solar system. They are gained through watching the television series or movie Star Trek. So you can see that here is another attempt to connect what you're going to with what students already know. And then using a large unlabeled chart of the solar system, provide an advanced organizer to state the objectives. So here it is, that's written. This could be your engage phase of your lesson. And within it, you see evidence of checking on prior knowledge, evidence of helping students become interested because you're talking about something that's familiar. But how could we jazz it up? How could we make this even more interesting? What other suggestions could you include in your introductory activity to really engage the learner? Can you think of something else that might be more engaging that you could introduce, you could include in this particular lesson?
Maybe a model, have students do a model and see what they think of the solar system based on prior knowledge. But I'm thinking our point was that in terms of question 2, you would have been, I have to make an assumption that the students would have watched that. Or, the movie
Star Trek.
Yes. Yeah, you have to guess that, or maybe, I don't know. And but I think I maybe have, maybe things like Play-Doh, depending on the age of the students, too. Play-Doh and different material, they can actually model it, make a model of it, have little popsicle sticks and make the connection to see what they know about the solar system first.
Or or you might have one actual, or you might have one there, as you've said, depending on the age of the students. Okay, so depending on their age, you might have one for them to interact with. You might have one for them to create, depending on what it is that where they are. Anything else? Well, the Star Trek point is a good point, because we're not all Trekkies. Some of us are, but some of us are not. So
they could show a video clip.
Yeah, a video clip, right?
Video clip of Star Trek or something like.
A short clip to show something on.
Yeah, a short clip.
Yeah, fine. Okay, but you've got you've got the point, the whole idea, and to go back to your earlier question, Jason, about the different levels of your domains: cognitive, psychomotor, affective domain, your objectives. I'm going back to your objectives question. The fact is that students are given a diagram and they are asked to identify the planet. They are given some items and they're able to write suitable justification. This is all cognitive. All right? But you could add a psychomotor dimension based on what Eva was just saying, that you could add a dimension of creating, right? And you could also add a dimension of the affective by introducing an objective that speaks to the attitude towards the outcomes perhaps of exploring the solar system, and have students respond to perhaps some controversial issue about exploring the solar system in some way. You understand? So that's those you could tweak that, you could add those to it, but as it is right now, these are all cognitive. All right. So you could include that right there. So the point I'm making is that the introduction must do what it says it is supposed to do. It must connect the learner from where they are to where you want them to be. Okay? And notice as well that in this introductory activity, you have a visual, something physical like your chart, you have the questions, you might even have to watch a movie, and we're suggesting that you could perhaps have some sort of model. You could introduce also an element of drama there as well, okay? But you have the conversation taking place. So it's not just, to go back to your concern, Tracy, it's not just one modality that you're using. You're using a variety of stimuli so that you can get students to be properly engaged. All right? It's not the kind of thing you can do a demonstration on, because it doesn't really lend itself well to demonstrations. But you could, if you had another topic, do something of that nature as well. All right? Now, in the development phase, they have, now this is not written using the 5E model. But if we had some time, what we could do is to take those 1 to 7, which is what I'm going to ask you to do in your break when you come back, and see if you can put those into the 3 E's. That is the explain, expand, explore. See if you can find 3 E's, those 3 E's here. You understand what I'm asking you? You get it? So this is not written, but if we were to use the 5E model, could you find the 3 E's right here? When we come back from break, you will tell me. And closure would be now your evaluation, and it shows you how they're supposed to do what. All right. So we're gonna, okay, here it is. Your materials and aids are at the bottom of the page, Samuel. All right. Now, we're gonna take a break, and what I want you to do in your break is to just look at this and see if you can find the 3 E's. When we come back, we're going to be tying this up. Have a look at the section, or I should say one more thing about it. I should have pointed it out to you. it also looks at using deductive and inductive approaches and gives you some examples. So this chapter is a useful chapter for you to read and to help to, you know, give you some ideas as to how to go about your planning and that sort of thing. And then there is this very useful and very brief table that compares the two that you might also find useful in terms of the sequence. Okay, so here's the concept label, examples, review the definition, and you produce opportunity for more examples and practice. In the inductive approach, they discover the critical attributes. You don't tell them what it is. The concept definition comes after you have shown them the specific examples for them to come up with what we mean by the concept fruit or the concept liquid or the concept solid. This approach is more possible, more easily used where you have concrete concepts. I'll just tell you straight up, the inductive approach in the way it is organized here, where you have when you have concrete concepts. If it's more abstract, then you might find that this approach is more useful. All right, so that's pretty much that. So I'm just taking you through the chapter, and it gives you an idea of different approaches. So there are several approaches here on top of what Metz had given you. I don't want you to feel that you're being, you know, inundated with all of these. The whole idea is to give you options. Have a read, have a sense, because for everybody it may not be the same fit. Some things will fit, you know, your personalities and your interests better than others. But I find the chapter 9 of Lang and Evans a useful chapter, and I think you will too when you go through it and read it through. All right, because in science, we do have a lot of opportunities for teaching some complex concepts, and we need to find ways to ensure that students get it. All right, so we'll take 15 minutes, we'll take 20 minutes. So you get something to eat and do what you have to do, and then look at the 7 options, the 7 steps in the development phase, and see if you can identify which one would go to which E, which of the other 3 E's, and we will, when we come back, we'll go into the discrepant events. We'll pick up from there, look at discrepant events, and have you talk about concept teaching, discrepant events from the perspective of Longfield and Shin. All right, 20 minutes.